And then I sit down, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself. So your name, married, age, anything you think is important. If you want to immediately already say I'm a farmer or architect or whatever.
Okay.
Something about yourself. And then I'll just ask you about October 7th.
Okay.
What your story. Run?
That's good.
Okay. Today's October 30th, 2023. I'm Natalie Mann, interviewing Eric Sherman at the Engedi Hotel for the USC Shaw Foundation, and the interview will be in English. So, first of all, Eric, anything you want to tell us, you want to hear, if you want to stop at any point, feel free to stop.
Okay.
And that's it. Let's start the interview now.
So what I said.
So, could you introduce yourself?
Okay. My name's Eric Sherman. Married, father of three. Moved to Israel 13 years ago. Me and my wife and baby were in the acceptance process at Kibbutz Cholit. I work in the kibbutz as basically gardening and landscaping and general maintenance of anything that's green. Yeah.
So we want to take you back to October 7th, and if you could share your story with us.
Okay. So on Saturday morning, it was the weekend that my kids, my two older kids, were sleeping over also. So it was me and my two older kids, Silan and Geffen, 10 and 7, and my wife, and me, and my young daughter. She's going to be 2 next month. I woke up around 6:30 in the morning to the sounds of booms, which is, just sounded like normal rocket fire from in the area. And then there was a air raid siren that finally, got me up because we had to go into the shelter. So my wife grabbed the baby, I grabbed my son, and my older daughter was already sleeping in the shelter when we went in. So everyone woke up and so I closed the door, and literally within a few minutes we started hearing gunshots outside of the house, which is not, it's not a normal thing. Once in a while you hear gunshots, but it's far off in the distance because it's army bases in the area, maybe using training and whatnot. But so we heard the gunshots very close to the house, and me and my wife immediately looked at each other and we realized that it wasn't the normal sounds that we're used to hearing. We basically immediately understood what's going on, and maybe not even 5 minutes after that, we started hearing glass breaking. Weren't sure if it was at our neighbors or at our house, but we heard smashing the glass back door, the sliding glass door, and in the meantime, also booms going off and everything else. But a few minutes later, I was holding the door for the safe room. I was holding it closed because they said, that they pull it up, the handle up, and it locks. But I understood that it doesn't actually lock. You can still open it from the outside of the door because it's meant for, as a bomb shelter. It's not meant for being locked in from, terrorists coming inside the house and invading the house. So I heard them speaking in Arabic, and I heard them say in English, "safe room." So what I guess from the situation is also when I look back on the whole situation after reading all the WhatsApp for the whole group from the kibbutz and everything, it seems that we were the first house that they came into in the whole kibbutz. Because we told them during what was going on. We wrote in the group what was happening. We said we heard voices. They're in our house, and so I heard them speaking out right outside the door. I grabbed the handle, and they tried to open the door, and just I held it closed, and so they didn't really struggle too long with that. Then there was quiet for about 2 minutes, and we heard like a sss, and then an explosion, and the door to the safe room was blasted open, and in that moment, in my eyes, I see them just coming in and shooting us, and that's it, and I kind of froze for a second or two, and jumped up out of where I was and grabbed the door again, because I realized, okay, that they didn't come in, so I still have a second to grab the door. So I grabbed the door, slammed it shut, held the lock again, and I don't know what if it was just luck or miracle, whatever you want to call it. They didn't come back in. I closed it, held it closed, and they didn't come back in. We heard them outside. They were shooting at the windows to the safe room, because it's like a steel shutter. But yeah, so they didn't come into the room. Everyone, obviously everyone was very scared. My daughter screamed, and told my wife that she loves her, and everyone, I guess, in that moment, my wife threw a blanket over our daughter, my baby, who was still sleeping, so that they wouldn't see her. It's just that moment where you figure, okay, I didn't have any weapons or anything. It's just, I have to get up and guard them with my body, or try and fight or whatever it is. But luckily they didn't come back, and I just had that moment to close the door, and so we got really lucky. And this is all before 7 in the morning.
Whoa.
This is all before 7 in the morning. And so as soon as this is going on, and my wife's sending messages into the group chat for the kibbutz, and she says, they're in the house, and they threw a grenade. That's what it ended up being, the boom. They threw a grenade, and they threw it in the hallway, and it wasn't directly in front of the door. So we just got really lucky that it seems like they weren't not professional, I guess you could say. They just kind of looked in and threw it, and looking back on things, I think that's also what saved us when they came around multiple other times, because we were in the shelter for almost 12 hours, and during this time they came back multiple times, and we heard them outside and hear them, and I think when they came into the house and saw that everything was already blown up, they were like, okay, we already did our job here, and they didn't continue. So we really got lucky in that aspect. It was just so long. The day was so long. It took like, it started at 6:30. It took like at least 6 hours before they even said that the army's on their way to the kibbutz. And we had thought well before that they had already got there. Because you hear different types of gunfire, and you kind of figure, how could they take so long? Like what actually happened? And people in the beginning, when my wife was texting, what happened, they were like, no, they're new, you guys are new, that's just Iron Dome, or it's just, the bombs going off, whatever. They didn't realize the seriousness of the situation, because nothing like this has ever happened, and it just seems, it's unimaginable. There's so many security measures, and you always feel like, it's such a strong defense system, and military, and when it came down to it, no one was there to protect us, and we felt just completely vulnerable to whatever they want to do to us. That's what they'll do. In the group, they just said to stay in the safe room and keep the door locked, and so that's really what we did all day. I came out at one point to grab some bread and cheese and water, and a trash can for the women to go use the bathroom, and my son just in the bottle. It was really just like high anxiety, like really like at the highest level for so long, and your body just starts shaking, and you get to this point where it's like just extreme shock and trauma because it's so long. Like that was the hardest part. It's like really just not knowing what's going on, and for being for so long, just like trapped in this little room, and we're seeing other messages that from our friends that they're burning alive in the room, like that they lit their houses on fire, and they're saying save us, help, and there's nothing we can do about it, and you just basically see that they're going. You can tell from the messages they're going house in the whole community, and it wasn't clear what was happening 100%, but you kind of just got a picture, and it wasn't even the cell service kept going off, so it was like every hour or so you just get like a bunch of messages, and you kind of like try and catch up to what's going on because you're just in the dark. You don't want to make noise, you don't want to do anything. When I went out one time to get the bread and water and stuff, I heard a fire. I heard like flames roaring, and I looked out the window and I saw the houses, at least in the neighborhood where we live, the houses are like in threes. So we're in the middle of 3 houses, of other 2 houses, and luckily our 3 houses were actually, they didn't get burned, and they were relatively okay. I guess we got it the worst with the grenade, but the 3 houses right next to us, all 3 of them were on fire, and they all burnt down. One woman was stuck in the shelter, and the other 2 neighbors whose houses were on fire, they ran and broke the window and saved her, got her out. But yeah, they just kept telling us to stay in the safe room, stay in the shelter, even if people come in and knock on the door, not to let them in. So they're saying even if the army comes and they say it's the army, like don't let them in because they're dressed up like the army and they're saying that they're the army. And so I think it was around 4 in the afternoon, 4:30. The army did knock on our door. They were knocking on the door, and they were yelling that it's the army. We didn't make a noise. We didn't trust them. Actually, when they first started speaking, we heard the accent, and it didn't sound like 100% regular Israeli accent. So me and my wife looked at each other, and we were like, no, we're not opening it. And so they were like, we heard them talking, and they're like, okay, so let's break it down. Let's blow it out, because they were basically coming in there to see if there's terrorists in there, and now I know also that it was the first house that they came into. So it seems like we were the first house that the terrorists came into, and it was also the first house that the army came into when they came into the kibbutz, because we're relatively close to the gate, and there's like a trail that leads right to our house. So they were telling us to open the door, and only when they said they were going to blow the door open, me and my wife made a noise, yelled, "Don't!" And they started talking to us and telling us that they need us to open the door to make sure that there's no terrorists inside. And my wife told them, they told us not to open the door for anyone, even if they tell us that it's the army. And he kept telling me, you gotta open the door. And I said, well, what are you gonna do when we open the door? Like, for what? What do I need to open it for? And he said, don't worry. He's like, anything you need to know, ask me anything in Judaism, like related to Judaism, or I'll tell you. And he said, his name and where he's from. And then they convinced us to open the door. So very, very hesitantly I opened the door, but it was the Israeli soldiers. It was like the most relieving moment ever. It was just unbelievably, just the whole day was so crazy, and then just to finally get that chance to breathe, and so they came in, and everyone was relieved, but very quickly we also realized, the situation that what was going on. They said they've been there for about an hour and a half. They said they had two injured with them. And they asked they asked me and my wife who did army service, and I moved to Israel after I was 25 already, and they didn't ask me to go to the army. And so my wife was in the army, and she knows how to, handle a weapon and everything. So they gave her M16, and so we realized if they're giving citizens, weapons, and then they're obviously really short-handed, and they're in a bad situation also. So they gave her the weapon, and we closed the door. And maybe a half hour later, they came and knocked again, and they moved us into the neighbor's house because they wanted to kind of get everyone together because they didn't have enough soldiers to guard each house. So they put us with our neighbors and the neighbor's dog, and then we ended up getting another one of our neighbors and her dog, and then another whole family and their dog. So it was like 4 families together and 3 dogs, and it was a rough 2 hours after that. But at least we knew the army was there. Every time, at that point we could leave the safe room, and if we needed to go into the house, we could. Me and my neighbor, if the kids needed to go to the bathroom or whatever, we would walk them and make sure everything was safe and take the weapon also. And the soldiers were there, and we informed them where to go because they had a map, but they didn't know where was like immediate, where they needed to go to help immediately. Because through the messages in the kibbutz, we understood which houses were on fire and which people were like in need of immediate help, like like serious emergency situation. And so we showed them where to go. There was also the woman who they evacuated from the burning house. She was still she wasn't taken care of, so we showed the army where she was, so they evacuated her also. I didn't really get to see too much besides the houses that were burned next to our house. I didn't, it was just when the army told us we could evacuate, when we could start leaving. That's when I actually got out of the house and started seeing things, and I went to go see if my car was still. I had a Jeep. I went to go see if it was still in one piece, and there was gunshots in it. The windows were broken and the front windshield's broken, but so they checked it to see if it was like booby trapped, I guess you could say, like to see if there was bombs or anything underneath. And they said it was fine, so we got in and packed it up with like 10 people, and we evacuated after it was all clear, like basically clear. There was still fighting going on the other side of the kibbutz.
What time was this around,
That was around like 7:30 already at night, because it was already dark. It was already dark when we came out, and maybe even closer to 8. But yeah, it was. And they said we could evacuate to another kibbutz Gvulot, which was about a 15-minute drive, but it's just further in, so it's not as close to the fighting. And so we got in the car and we started going, and it was like scenes that are like Mad Max. Like it was like seriously like apocalyptic type stuff. Like there's like cars burnt on both sides of the roads. You see dead bodies on the side of the road. Like it was horrific. Like just like you don't think. Oh, it's like a movie. You know what I mean? You don't ever think you'll see these things in real life. There was a tank on fire. There was a motorcycle in the middle of the road, and all the lights were out, so we couldn't see anything. And there was. So we were driving, and there was a middle. Yeah, exactly. It was just like just a surreal situation.
Were you like a few cars together?
They told us to go. They told us to go at least like 2 cars together, but the car that drove in front of us went like faster than we did, but I didn't feel safer if we were with more cars or less cars. It was just like real insane situation. Like this, I don't know. It's like after going through something like that, you don't feel safe anywhere. Like it doesn't matter where in Israel, where like, you know. So kind of just everything you thought beforehand was proven wrong, and it just shows that you can be put in the life can in a second just put you in the craziest horror story and yeah. I mean, looking at the messages and obviously knowing now everything I know about everything that happened with everyone else in the kibbutz. I mean, we got off, really, it was really a miracle that we got out alive and that they didn't come in when they threw the grenade. I really feel like it was because it was the first house, they didn't know what to do yet. And they were like trying to explain to each other, trying to figure out what they wanted to do exactly. And yeah, I mean, just really lucky to be alive. Really, I mean, my older daughter took it really hard. She was really, like having like a panic attack through most of the time. Inside the safe room, yeah. And it was,
How did you guys deal with that? Like, how did you? I mean, you have to be quiet.
Yeah, they knew we had to be really quiet, but sometimes when people are nervous, they start talking too much. And my daughter was like that, and I had to just try to remind them that we have to be silent because we don't. If they hear us, then they'll come back. I mean, there was one. I don't know if I said before, but there was like one moment also in the morning before they threw the grenade. This is our first time that we went into the safe room for like anything like that. We didn't. Before this, we lived in a bus, traveling around the south, and so we didn't have a safe room ever. And so this is the first time that we actually had to use it. And so the window has the regular window, and it has like a metal shutter outside. So I closed it, but I didn't close it all the way, and I didn't know that there's like a little lock on it also. So at one point we heard the metal moving, and they like moved the window open a little bit. And my wife said she like could picture them, like she could picture seeing them through the window, and like she told me like you have to close it. And like I didn't at the moment. I guess I didn't realize how serious that was. But so I ended up getting up, opening the window, and then closing it out like until the secure and putting the lock. But
usually you can't even close those metal windows.
They're really heavy, but so luckily it was I got it closed and locked. But because later on they came around and they were shooting at the windows, and yeah.
Where are your kids still with you here in this kibbutz? Or did they go back to their mom? Or?
My two older kids went back to their mom. Their mom came to pick them up from the kibbutz that they evacuated us to the same night.
The first kibbutz.
Yeah. And she's tell me it doesn't matter where they are, just tell me and I'll get there. She was always a bit like scared about us living there in the first place. Just from like the rockets and stuff like that. Not ever thinking that something like this would happen, but yeah, I don't think she'll ever let him go back there again.
Where does she live?
She lives in the south also. Oh. She lives about 10 minutes 10 minutes east of Netivot, which is still relatively. It's like they have sirens and they have rockets fired over there too, but it's a much safer area. Yeah, my son, he kind of like disconnected, and he was just really quiet. Didn't really express too much. I don't think he understood exactly what was going on. He understood it was gunshots and everything, but maybe he thought it was the army. I didn't get into it too much what was going on because I tried to just stay calm so that they wouldn't get too scared. But my older daughter knew exactly what was going on, and luckily my baby daughter, she didn't go to sleep until like 2 or 3 in the morning the night before. She had a really rough night, and so she slept until like 10 in the morning. And so luckily she missed like all the real craziness, but and then when she woke up, that was also really hard because we didn't know how to keep her quiet, you know. And she's still nursing, so luckily that my wife had to like just kind of forcefully nurse her for a while. But at some point we couldn't like, you know, hold her mouth shut, and we had to at one point when we thought they were inside the house again, because there were many times when we thought that they were in the house shooting to like fighting the army from inside the house, like because all the gunshots were really, really loud. But it seems like she'll, you know, I don't know, it's hard to tell for a 2-year-old how much they attain from the situation, but yeah, I don't know, it's also crazy, you know. It's like, I mean, I work there as the like landscaping, and you know, you see how much of a little piece of heaven, you know, that it's like in the middle of the desert, you know, and everything is so green, and people are so happy, and it's such a nice community, and you see just, you know, just everything can be ruined in a second, you know. It's, in one day everything can be, you know, and so many kids orphaned. And it's just crazy, you know. I mean, I go around, part of my job, you know, I mow all the grass in the whole kibbutz, and just like, I got to know everyone in that kind of sense, like just everyone's neighbor, and you know, you hear the atrocities that happen, and you know, and the people who you'll never see again. You know, the guy I worked with, you know, side by side, he was murdered, and he had just turned 32 a week before.
What's his name?
Chaim Katzman. And
Is he alone in his house or with his family?
he, from what I understand, he went to the neighbor's house to check on one of my neighbors. Okay, so he went to the neighbor's house to check on my friend's on the woman who lives there. Her boyfriend was at this party, and
Party.
I don't know if it was the Nova or another one. There's 2 parties in the same night, but I think he was at one of the parties, and so he went to check on. My friend went to check on his girlfriend, and he went into the house and he saw that she was already she had been murdered. And so he went to check on another woman in a different house, and he came in there, and from what I understand, the door for the safe room, it had broken, like they didn't have a door, so they were hiding inside of a closet, so like him and her. And from what I understand, the terrorists came in and opened the closet and shot him in front of her, and he died there. And her, they had actually kidnapped 2 kids from a neighbor on the end of the neighborhood. We now understand that they had killed the 2 kids' mom, and their father was also at the party. So they took the 2 kids and they brought them to the neighbor, to the woman, and they took the kids and her to every house with them, and they tried to make her tell the people in the safe rooms to come out, and they're like, you know, oh, it's to exactly to entrap them. And so she did say things, but then she said something at the end that they would understand that something was weird, like not to open it. So no one opened the doors. They actually took her and the 2 kids. They kidnapped them to Gaza. They had gotten into Gaza, like past the fence, and the 2 kids were injured. One of them was 4 years old. He had been shot through his foot, went, you know, through the top and out the bottom, and there was a baby who was 4 months old. And so she was holding the baby the whole time, and I think sometimes the terrorists were holding the 4-year-old on their back, and sometimes she had to hold him. But once they got into Gaza, she says the terrorists let them go. and they made their way back to the kibbutz by foot. And he couldn't walk. The 4-year-old could barely walk because he was shot in his foot. So he was walking half the time. Half the time she was holding him. She said that even he was crawling half the way also. And he was really he's old enough. He's a really smart kid. He's old enough to know what happened. My daughter always plays with him, and it's just, their mom was at our house the day before it happened. Their dad, I sit with him every day at 9 o'clock. We have a break time. He manages all the orchards, and his brother is managing the maintenance, and me and my friend Chaim, who was murdered, are the landscaping. And I know the kids are okay now. I know the 4-month-old. I know he had burns, in his lungs and everything from inhaling smoke, and I don't know if it was from fire or from just grenades. I think there was also a grenade launch. There's a lot of the whole house there. I think it's booby trapped. They haven't even been able to go into it fully, and this is quite a bit after already. And yeah, it's crazy that she was able to save those 2 kids, though. She's a real hero. And those kids, just what they went through, it's unimaginable. The stories you hear there. Yesterday we were taking care of a girl who saw both of her parents get murdered, and she was hiding in the closet. What world? It's just so insane to hear a little child who's in elementary school talking about, her parents were murdered, and she's just talking about it like it's something normal.
Is that the girl that Naama and her husband?
Yeah. Yes, it was. Yeah. Adi. Yeah. It's good. I guess it's good that they're talking about it. It's good that the kids are talking about everything, but trying to get through the trauma like that. But it's obviously something that's never gonna leave them.
Do you have a message that you want people to, whoever's gonna hear this interview at any point, some kind of message?
We want to come back. We want to go back there. We want to rebuild, and hopefully the army and the government and whatever will take care of what needs to be taken care of. It's never an easy situation, this whole mess. But everyone who lives in that area in Otef Aza. All the land that's surrounding the Gaza Strip. I don't think anyone's really going to go back unless they know 100% that something like this could never happen again. And it's going to take a lot to rebuild. It's going to take probably several years until we can even go back there, in my opinion. From what I understand, it's going to take quite a while. But we want to go back. We want to rebuild, and make sure that little piece of heaven that we all remember will out-survive the horrors and the evil that humans, or whatever, I don't know if I want to call it humans, but that people did, and the actions that people did. And gotta make sure that it's not even a matter of ideology. It's just a matter of proving that we're stronger than that. That even if they try and do something that's like the most evil thing possible, we got to be stronger than that, because we're never going to go down to that level. We're never going to do those type of things to them. I don't know. Hopefully one day it will just be peaceful enough that everyone can live normal lives. Because at this point, don't foresee that happening, and anyone who lived there and went through what we went through they're never gonna have a normal life. You know, it's gonna be treatments for and probably, you know, medicines and all sorts of stuff at such young ages. And the most important thing now is that the people of Israel stand together and make sure we get through this. Because if we don't stay strong and don't get through this, then we won't be here. It's as simple as that. I don't think the country can survive if we don't, you know, stay strong in the worst of times. You know. So, I mean, I know that the community is taking donations and you know, all sorts of, you know, GoFundMes and things like that, trying to rebuild as much as possible. It's going to be a long road. It's a long road ahead of us. It's going to be a long process, and you know, it's going to be like unsure, a lot of uncertainty for now, and probably for quite a while. Thank you for listening.